Gospel Tangents is supported by users like you. Please support us at gospeltangents.com or on Patreon. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. You know, a couple of years ago, Cheryl Bruno, Joe Steve Zwick, and Nick Latursky published a great book called Method Infinite. It talks about the origins of Freemasonry and the LDS Endowment. And we're going to dive deep into that with Cheryl Bruno, talk about this fantastic book. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. So I feel bad because we have not talked about your amazing book on Freemasonry.
Oh.
I didn't prepare you that that was going to be a question, but is that something that we can talk about?
Yes. I'm not saying I remember every date that either, because
that's okay, because it's been a few years since I read that book
years,
too.
yeah.
When do you remember when it was published?
2022.
Okay, so it's been 2 years.
Wow, I remembered a date.
There you go. And so you wrote that with Nick and
Joe Zwick.
Joe, there we go. And so, I mean, why don't you introduce us to the topic of Freemasonry? I've heard an argument that Joseph introduced Freemasonry because there are all these secrets,
Okay.
and so it kind of does relate to polygamy in the fact that, okay, I'm going to swear you to secrecy for Masonry, and then now you have to keep the polygamy secret too. What do you think of that argument?
In our William Marks book, we do talk about these. We have a chapter where it talks about the several organizations that Joseph Smith set up to kind of induce loyalty in his followers. So one of them is Freemasonry. One of them is the Council of the Quorum of the Anointed, Council of 50, even like the Nauvoo Legion, the Danites. Those are all organizations that came together to really that were secretive, that people who were loyal to Joseph Smith could come together and have a community. So there were, I think Mike Quinn maybe did a study of who the people were who were connected in at least like 3 or 4 ways through those organizations. There were a lot of them, and that's your core group.
And William Marks would have been a Freemason as well.
Yes,
yeah.
He was a Freemason, and he was in all of the different groups.
In the Quorum of the Anointed.
Maybe not the Danites. He wasn't in the Danites.
Okay.
But he was definitely Council of 50, Quorum of Anointed, Freemason, Nauvoo Legion.
Quorum of Anointed would be those that had received the endowment. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. And so do you agree with the argument that Joseph introduced Freemasonry to the church to help people keep secrets about polygamy?
Not so much. I think that loyalty was a part of it, but not necessarily polygamy that I see. To me, Joseph was fascinated by Freemasonry and the way that it taught like ancient truths, and he was very into presenting things in a way that was Masonic, and he liked the Christian view of Freemasonry, looking back at the Old Testament from kind of a Christian lens. I think he really brought that into Mormonism a lot. And so he was just fascinated by Freemasonry. And I think he felt that Freemasonry was kind of a true principle that had become apostate over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we talk about in the book a lot, that there, in Joseph's mind, there was a true Masonry and a spurious Masonry.
Right.
And it was almost the same as he thought about Christianity, where over the years it had become apostate and it needed a restoration. In the same way, he was trying to restore true Freemasonry to the earth. So I think that's what he was doing in creating this lodge in Nauvoo and then bringing all these men into the lodge. Now you have power in the state of Illinois in the Masonic organization. And he, I think, was on his way to restore to fix Freemasonry into what it should have been.
Okay.
Or what he thought it should have been.
Okay. And so what do you say about people, especially critics of the church, let's say, that just basically say the LDS Endowment is just a ripoff of Freemasonry.
Yeah, I don't see that at all. I see Joseph Smith as a ritual genius. And what was happening in the area in the United States at the time, you have to look at that. And what they were doing was many people were getting the 3 basic Masonic degrees and then going and creating new degrees. We had like an Indian degree. We had one with Abraham meeting Melchizedek, that little story.
Mhm.
And people would create these degrees, and they were Masonic degrees, like extra appendant degrees, they were called. So they were, appendant to the 3 degrees of Blue Lodge Masonry. So what he was doing wasn't any different than this. What he was doing was using Freemasonry, using that system to create another degree. And it wasn't unusual, and it wasn't odd, and it doesn't bother me at all. So, and like I said, I'm a practicing member of the church, and to me, it fits with my Mormon mindset very well. And I don't have any anxiety over the fact that he used Freemasonry and created a ritual.
Okay. So the early, you're the expert here.
Okay.
But to my knowledge, Joseph Smith Sr. was a Mason, and there were some Masons in the family. Of course, we have is it called the Dale Morgan affair? Who was the guy that got
William
murdered?
Morgan affair.
William Morgan. The William Morgan affair. Maybe you should tell that story, because that happened right before the publication of the Book of Mormon.
Okay, so first of all, I have to go to Joseph Smith Sr. So we have some evidence that Joseph Smith Sr. was perhaps a Mason, but the thing is, Joseph Smith is a really common name, and so it's not like positive. We do have positive evidence that our Joseph Smith Jr. was a Freemasonry, but his father, Nick, Joe, and I all believe that he was a Freemason, and we give reasons in our book of why we believe this. But we cannot nail it down that he was proof positive a Freemason. Now,
just because his name is so common.
Yes, and so, like we have a lodge that has a member named Joseph Smith, but there were 9 Joseph Smiths in the area that could have been that person, and so we've kind of battled that out with Dan Vogel a little bit. And
yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't.
I'm going to ask you some Dan Vogel questions.
Oh,
here.
no. Oh, no. So, I can't say that I know for a fact that he was. I believe he was. And we do know for a fact that some of his brothers were. We have, cousins of Joseph Smith, uncles of Joseph Smith, and we have many of his neighbors. We have the people that worked on his leg operation. We have so many close people.
They were Masons as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were all Freemasons. And so you can read our book and see how many of his close associates and his family members were Freemasons. And so, yes, that makes a big difference in that he knew about Freemasonry from a very young age. And talking about the William Morgan affair, and an incident happened very close to where Joseph Smith lived in New York, in Batavia, New York, where a certain man named William Morgan was threatening to expose Masonic secrets, and he was writing a book. And before the book was published, it was eventually published with all the secrets revealed, but before the book was published, allegedly a group of Freemasons kidnapped him and killed him. And then we never know what happened to him in the end. And I believe that it was Freemasons that kidnapped him, killed him. But again, we don't know that for sure. We have to say alleged. But what happened in the United States at the time was these Freemasonry was a big thing in the early United States. And
George Washington was a Mason.
People of very high caliber were Freemasons. And they would participate in these, symbolic vows, that they would slit their throat before revealing their Freemasonry secrets, different ways that they would be put to death rather than reveal Masonic secrets. And so I think that most of the Masons that participated in these vows saw them as symbolic. They're symbolic vows, right? It's like saying, cross my heart and hope that I stick a needle in my eye. You're not really going to stick a needle in your eye. So, but But then when these Masons...
Nor do you hope to die.
No, right, exactly. So when these Masons saw that actually people would put someone to death for revealing Masonic secrets, they were like, okay, I'm out. I'm not going to be part of this. So that started the decimation of Freemasonry in the United States. People left the lodge by the millions. And then there became anti-Masons who would go around and like reveal the ceremony by like holding little plays in public places and showing what happened during the ceremony.
Sounds like the Godmakers or something.
All right. So Joseph Smith would have been very aware of what happened in Masonic lodges from a very young age and continuing all the way through.
And William Morgan, I believe he died in 1826.
Yeah.
Joseph married Morgan's wife, right? Supposedly?
Yes. Yes. So William Morgan's wife married again, George Harris, and the two of them joined the Mormon Church and moved to Missouri and lived very close to where Joseph Smith was living in Missouri. And it is believed that he at that time married her.
And so that's a very
Morgan.
Interesting tie.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
And that would have been 1840s when Joseph married
1838 or 1839, 1838 probably.
Okay.
Right. So.
Okay. See, you're good with dates.
Well.
But anyway, the point, let me go back to, so if I'm right on the year 1826 when he died, right. So this would have been right before the publication of the Book of Mormon. And I believe Stan Vogel has made the case that the Book of Mormon was quite anti-Masonic, and I know that you disagree with that. Let's talk about that argument. Try to present Dan's case in best case possible.
Okay, good. This is an ongoing argument that we've had. So Dan believes that the Book of Mormon is anti-Masonic because there are several places where like the bad people, like Lamanites, are presented with very Masonic language. They're wearing aprons, or they're, that certain things they're participating in connect really well with Masons. And so I agree with that part. I think that, yes, we can see Masonry in the Book of Mormon. However, where I disagree is that not everything that has to do with Masonry in the Book of Mormon is dark and ugly. We also have the other side of Masonry where they're building a temple, and the temple they're building is not a Christian temple, it's a Masonic temple. We have several, and in the book you can go through that, and I will outline all the things not all, but some of the things I see in the Book of Mormon that are Masonic, but they're good Masonic, right? And so this has to do with the spurious Masonry and the, pure Masonry. So in the Book of Mormon, we see pure Masonry. We also see spurious Masonry. And when Joseph Smith rails against, the Masons, Master Mahan and everything in the Book of Mormon, he's talking about
Isn't that the Pearl of Great Price? Master Mahan?
Yeah. So he's talking about spurious Masonry when we see that, right? But he also believes in a pure Masonry. So we have apostate Masonry, we have pure Masonry. So I don't think the Book of Mormon can be lumped together and said it's anti-Masonic. What it is it's showing that Masonry, like Christianity, can become apostate. And Joseph is saying, I'm going to restore it into its pure form. And we have this group of people that are pure Masons in the Book of Mormon. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think the other thing in the Book of Mormon specifically is this issue of secret combinations, which comes in a little bit later.
Definitely Masonic.
And I believe, so it's definitely, those are Masonic elements.
Oh, yeah.
And those are always seen as bad Masonry.
Apostate, right.
Yeah.
Apostate.
Okay. And so, but you're saying that the people who built the temple are the good Masonry people? And what does Dan say about that?
Well, I thought when we came out with our book that he would, accept that and,
He didn't.
No, he didn't. And it was very surprising to me that he did not. And you can see in several podcasts we've gone back and forth about it. He doesn't like our narrative because he thinks it explains everything too neatly. But I think that's the strength of it. So.
Okay. So if somebody asked you, is the Book of Mormon an anti-Masonic Bible, you would say?
No, I don't think it's anti-Masonic.
Okay.
However, we do have quotes of people in the area who were reading the Book of Mormon. Some saw it as anti-Masonic. Some saw it as positive Masonic. Some of them said, oh, all the Mormons are becoming Masonic, because they'd read the Book of Mormon and they'd see the Masonry, aspect of it. But then some said it's preaching against Masonry. So you see the same kind of thing happening in the area where they could view the Book of Mormon in these two different ways.
Okay. So what about the issue? I know there was a podcast a long time ago about, Joseph Smith believed that Masonry goes back to King Solomon's temple. Well, as we see now, modern historians say Middle Ages is as at best, as far back as it goes. So is that a problem for, say, believing church members that Joseph Smith, it looks like, pretty clearly got that wrong, and that he's trying to restore something that never existed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, it can be a problem. And it was believed all the way down to like Melvin J. Ballard, who still thought that, Brigham Young said it often, had a very literal view of Masonry where it went back to King Solomon's temple, literally. I think Masons today, there are many Mormon Masons today and just many Christian Masons today who believe that that's very symbolic. And I think Joseph Smith and Brigham Young felt it was symbolic, but they also definitely thought it was literal.
Mhm.
And that's a little bit of a problem,
Some people say it's a big problem.
It's the same thing as him saying that Adam was a real person that's going to come back and, on the earth and bring all the keys at Adam on Diamond and stuff. If you believe Adam and Eve is a symbolic story, then that causes a little bit of dissonance for you.
Yeah, and there are some people who do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we still have that. It's the same with creation, evolution, that kind of thing. So we have some people that believe the earth is literally 4,000 years old and, that kind of thing. And so this does cause a problem for Mormons. It's hard to deal with, you have to grapple with it.
Well, so what would you say to someone who would say, hey, Joseph Smith got this wrong. It's affecting my testimony. It's making me not believe that temple worship is worthwhile? What would you say to them?
I just feel like for me, temple worship is worthwhile because of its symbolic, and it's almost Gnostic. Like you talk to Maxine Hanks and she'll tell you about, Gnosticism and knowledge, gaining knowledge and through ritual and that kind of thing. So for me, the temple is valuable because of the ritual and because of the knowledge I can gain symbolically, and that's the kind of thing I would point them to. I guess you can say that I compartmentalize things in my own religious practice. So I can't really suggest that anyone do that, but that is what I do.
Okay. I remember in our interview from years ago, before you'd published your book, we were packing up. I think I had I'd forgotten to turn on my recorder, and you said something about Danites in Kirtland. Could we go there?
Okay, because it's been so long since I've researched this, I don't know if I'll do a good job, but I believe it was John Whitmer who wrote an early history of the church. And when he talked about Danites, he mentioned that they started in Kirtland. And so I go in my book, I talk about things that were said about salt losing its savor that come from the salt sermon, that
Missouri.
was preached in Missouri, but that was also seen in the Doctrine and Covenants from back in the Kirtland days. So there's several things in the Kirtland days that show that this Danite idea was beginning to come forth before they actually moved to Missouri.
Okay. So Missouri is where the Danites become a little bit more famous in the fact that they're a secret organization, but Mormons are retaliating and burning homes in Missouri and that sort of a thing. So I was shocked. I remember when you said that it was in Kirtland. And do we have any more information from Danites in Kirtland? Were they much more benign back then?
I believe it was more of like, I do believe there were a group of people, but it was more an idea in Kirtland than actual, activist activities, going on. When it really happened in Missouri, where they did, they acted out their ideas.
Okay. And in more of a secret combinations kind of a way?
Yes. And I don't even know that there was a lot of secrecy when it existed in Kirtland, but it just became more of a secret organization in Missouri.
Oh, okay. So we get that from John Whitmer's history.
But John Whitmer's history definitely talks about it and how it started in Kirtland.
Okay. The other thing that I thought was really interesting was, when we look at the Salt Lake Temple and the St. George Temple especially, you can see, if you know what to look for, the Masonic elements. But I remember being surprised that you said there were Masonic elements in Kirtland, because they're not easy to see.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
They're not as overt. And there's Masonic elements in the ritual behind the School of the Prophets, and that was held in the temple in Kirtland. And you can go through our book, and we kind of, people say that one of the weaknesses of our book is the chapter where I compare Masonry to the first vision. But I feel like that's actually pretty strong compared to like when we compare it to Kirtland, because I think there are correspondences. But to me, that feels kind of the weakest, that yes.
The Kirtland stuff is the weakest?
There were definitely Masonic influences going on in Kirtland, but yet there were other things really that came to the fore. And I think the Masonry isn't as overt as it was in Missouri, as it was in Nauvoo, even as it was in New York. Kirtland is just kind of a stretch, but it's there.
Go ahead.
But it's there.
It's there. Okay. Yeah. I've also heard, if I can bring a criticism to your book, that there's Masonry around every corner.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the one criticism that Nick and I talk all the time about, because it seems many people, almost everyone that's done a review will say this, that we think that the criticism is that we think that everything Joseph Smith did had to do with Freemasonry, and we don't see the influences from other places. However, we very clearly, in many, many, many places in the book, say that this is not every influence on Joseph Smith. We say it in the preface. We say it in like almost every chapter, that no, we don't think Freemasonry was everything that was happening with Joseph Smith. We know that he had got influences from Christianity, from all kinds of places. He was like a sponge. He drew it all in, and he tried to, integrate it into his religious philosophy. And so, yes, but my book is on Freemasonry. It's not on these other things. And so it's true. I do focus on what influence came in from Freemasonry, and I don't focus on the others, but I do very clearly say this is not the only thing. And then critics say, well, she's saying Masonry is the only thing. No, but that's what my book is about. So.
All right. So take that.
There.
All right. One other thing about Masonry, it's always been, and I think still is, an organization for males.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the issues for Masons in Joseph Smith's day was he was allowing women, of all people, to participate in these ordinances. What do you think of that?
Okay, well, one, we don't really see that he. Oh, well, you mean in the endowment he was
right?
Okay,
in the endowment,
because we don't really have the endowment going on a whole scale, on a huge scale before
his death.
Yeah, we have a select group of people,
but there were still Emma.
Right.
and
And we
people like
have,
that.
right. We have like, and
William
Rosanna
Marks'
Marks.
wife.
Yeah, others. So yes, but here's also something that often people will say that the Masonic lodges were upset with Joseph because he allowed women to come into the
Right.
lodge. I do not see that.
Oh,
I do not see that at all. I don't see because it was apparent to these other lodges and to the Grand Lodge in Illinois. It was apparent that he was bringing. They knew about it, but they didn't criticize him for it. The things they were criticizing him for other things.
Oh.
They had problems with him, but not because he brought women in. And so that's interesting. I show in the book different places in the United States where women were allowed to participate in Masonry. And eventually there became a Masonic organization that included women. And that wasn't widespread during Joseph Smith's time, but it was happening. So
Okay.
it's not something that they were really worried about Joseph Smith doing. The Masons themselves were not worried about that. So it might be something that modern day people have a problem with, but back then it was not.
Okay. What were the issues they had problems with?
So one, it was that power thing where, you've got 10 lodges in, I don't know exactly how many, but say 10 lodges in Illinois, and they all have like 7 or 8 people in them. So that's 80 Masons in Illinois. And then you have this Masonic lodge in Nauvoo that starts with 40 members on day 1. And, on day 2 has, 100
300,
members.
yeah.
So they've got, and by the end, they had 1,500 members only in Nauvoo Lodge. And we know that there were like 8 other different lodges, at least
was
5.
dwarfing them.
Right. So, Nauvoo was the biggest, but we had many others. So we had way more than 1,500 members, Mormon Freemasons in Illinois. So what's that going to do to the Grand Lodge? Who's going to take over the Grand Lodge in the next few years?
Yeah, it's
right?
going to be Nauvoo.
And so there was also, at the time, there was, and so their criticisms were, how are you bringing these people in so fast? Most Masonic lodges meet once a month, and maybe they make 3 members, or often it's just 1, but at the most they'll make 3 people a Mason once a month. Well, in Nauvoo, they were meeting every day, 3 times a day, So they're like, what? How can you be doing that? And you can't allow more than 3 Masons to, you can't make more than 3 Masons at a time, right?
Oh.
And so sometimes they were doing that, like maybe 5 at a time, or, so that was a big criticism, right?
Breaking the rules.
And they're advancing so fast. So you make them, they have 3 degrees, and usually it takes a month to go through each degree. Well, in Nauvoo, you were doing it, the next day, so they get their 3 degrees in 3 days, or at least in a week. So these are their criticisms.
And didn't, I think apprentice is the first level?
Entered apprentice.
Don't you have to memorize the entire ceremony?
Right.
Which would take a month probably.
Right. And so, there were, in Nauvoo, we can see that there were like tutors that were helping people learn the ceremony and things like that. But I think they weren't as strict either of making the member. So it may be like we do in the temple, where we have someone who will help us if we don't know the ceremony.
Okay. And so that was breaking the rule, and that was bugging the other lodges.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
So also at the time in the United States, there was a push to make a Grand Lodge of the United States that would be in charge of all these lodges, that would be over all the state lodges. And so if you have Illinois being the biggest lodge and having the most influence and the most power, then they could have taken over all the lodges in the United States with Mormons, right?
Because
and so
it
was
big.
A big fear. It was a huge fear. And especially with Joseph Smith thinking that he's going to change Masonry and fix it, that's a big problem. And that's more of a problem than if a few women are, having a Masonic-like ceremony.
Was it just a few women? Or I guess most of them were men. Because, we've got the 2 issues. We've got the endowment, and then we've got Freemasonry. And Joseph was having people be part of both, right? But there weren't very many women that were doing Masonry at all,
So
or were they
we
doing
have
Masonry?
we have some evidence that shows women actually joining into real Masonry. I don't think the endowment was considered necessarily Masonry. It was Joseph Smith's conception. It was his Masonic-like conception of a ritual, right?
Right.
So I wouldn't say when he brought women into the endowment that was necessarily bringing them into Masonry. But we do have just like 3 instances that we have uncovered where women actually get Masonic degrees in Nauvoo. So, so there we know that was going on, but we don't know very many that were doing it.
And they weren't too worried about that. When you said Joseph was going to purify Masonry, I don't remember if that's the word you used, but was that only through the endowment ceremony, or was he going to fix the Freemasonry
I think he
ceremony?
intended to restore Masonry and do it through the Masonic Lodge.
Was he going to make it like the endowment or not?
No, I don't think I think the endowment was something different.
Just something different. Okay. Of course, the other big story about Masonry in the church is on the day that Joseph died, many of the members of the mob were Masons, and it seems like Joseph was doing the Masonic call of distress as he was shot.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that?
Okay, so we don't have a huge mob of Freemasons outside the door of, underneath the window of
But there
the
were
jail.
Masons in the group.
So we have looked, and yes, there were Masons in the group, and we have looked to see who those Masons could have been. So I have that also in the book. We know who were members of the lodge in Carthage and in the surrounding lodges, and so who could have been those men. A lot of them we know were there because we have, documentation that they were part of the mob. So, we have tables in the book that show exactly who could have been there. And like the most it could have been were all the members of the surrounding lodges, which would have been less than 20 people, right?
Okay.
So it wasn't like a huge mob of Masons. But Masons may have been, and this is kind of speculative, Masons may have been involved in planning the assassination of Joseph Smith. And we also go into greater detail in the book on that. So I think it's pretty clear, but it is more speculative than some of the things that we say, that Masons were involved. So anyway, about the Masonic call of distress. We don't know what was in Joseph's mind when he said, "Oh Lord, my God," as he went out the window. It could have been part of the Masonic call of distress that starts with those words, and then ends with, "Is there no help for the widow's son?" So we don't know if Joseph was actually giving the Masonic call of distress, but it was interpreted as such by every Mormon who writes about it, right?
Yeah,
so Brigham Young
Masons.
says, he's giving the Masonic call of distress. And who's his wife that wrote about it? Zina, I don't remember which wife it was. But she said, "Oh, my husband gave the Masonic call of distress as he fell from the window."
Zina Huntington.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, yeah, and there were several accounts of it by Mormons, and every Mormon that writes about it says John D. Lee says he was giving. In fact, John D. Lee quotes the whole thing. He says, as Joseph went out the window, he said, "Oh, Lord, my God, is there no help for the widow's son?" So, they all interpret it as he was giving the Masonic call of distress. So I think it was something that he knew would be recognized by his people, at least, as the call of distress. Now, whether he was actually expecting anyone in the crowd to come to his aid, we don't know. Or maybe he was just saying it as a witness to God that,
I'm being killed by Masons.
Right. Or that none of the Masons are coming to my aid. So we give several possibilities in the book, in the chapter. But okay, so here's the other thing. What was it? It was John Taylor and Willard Richards who were in the jail with him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Willard Richards takes John Taylor out of the room and hides him under a mattress in another room after Joseph jumps out the window, right? And
I thought it was inside the room.
He takes him out of the room, brings him to another room, and hides him under a mattress.
Okay.
and then he raises his hands above his head 3 times and prays.
Oh.
So doesn't that sound like that Masonic call of distress almost? It's very Masonic anyway.
Oh.
So yeah, that's a very interesting, I think, aspect to the martyrdom.
Yeah, I remember that. Another thought just popped in my head. Wondered if you could comment. I know this is going back to the Missouri period. The Gallatin, was it the election battle?
Right.
And there was a Danite, I don't know what you call it, but some signs or tokens or whatever they're called, so that Danites could recognize each other.
Right.
Different from Masons, but very similar to Masonic.
So it was a Danite sign of distress.
Okay. And so I know in Gallatin, of course, this was over county elections and that sort of a thing, and it's called a battle, but Alex Boss said it was just a really big brawl.
Brawl. It was a brawl.
And so there were some Mormons there trying to vote. Citizens of Gallatin were trying to prevent them from voting. One of the Mormons did the
Yes, and I don't remember who the Mormon was, but he's in the middle of the crowd. They're beating him with rods, and he gives the call of distress, and his fellow Mormons all just run into the battle and just, help him. And I think John D. Lee describes that, how they saw the sign of distress, and they knew they needed to come to his aid.
Okay.
It's very interesting.
And so this Danite call of distress, how similar is it to the Masonic call of distress?
It didn't have any words associated with it that I know of. It was more
just
of a
sign or some actions or something.
Like they rubbed their ear, their cheek, or something like that in a certain way. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they describe what it was.
Okay. Was that based on Masonry?
Oh, yes.
They came that up?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Do you have anything more on that?
Well, I mean, the Danite oaths were so similar in wording to the Masonic oaths, and they had signs that were very similar. And so we look at all these things, and again, I keep saying go back to the book because there are just so many details that, I can't mention right now, but that when you put them all together and you see all the details, it makes it very clear and very obvious that what the Danites were doing was a copy of Masonry.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, I've kept you a long time, and I'm running out of questions, so I guess I better let you go.
Thank you.
But why don't you show everybody your book again, Secret Covenants. You've got to get it. It's fantastic. It really is fantastic.
It's a wonderful book, and I'm so excited because I have these 3 books that have come out in the last 2 years, and the Method Infinite on Freemasonry is still selling very well. This is a great book to get, and also William Marks. So all 3 of them are fabulous books, if I do say so myself. But really, I think this Secret Covenants is going to be kind of game changer.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to see when people read it what they think of it. And please let me know. And please leave a review on Amazon. So.
Have you gotten any feedback from Brian Hales on it yet?
Not on this one, no.
Because I remember I talked to him 2, 3, 4 years ago. I don't remember. He's moved on from polygamy.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I think Brian now has moved on and is doing other projects and really doesn't want to be, he doesn't want to do polygamy anymore. He's kind of being drawn into it by the polygamy skeptics, but I think he really has moved on, and we should probably let him move on.
Oh.
No, I think.
Well, I was just going to say, in my interview with him, we talked a little bit about polygamy at the first, but the purpose of the interview was to talk about the Book of Mormon, his latest project.
Right.
But one of the things he said was, there hasn't really been anything new, which was true a few years ago. It's not true anymore.
It's not true anymore. It is not true anymore. And that is why I've been very public about, because we do have Brian and others who are saying it's all been said. And I guarantee you it has not all been said. There are new things being said, and I want us to respond to them because I think there's a response.
Yeah.
But
well, get it. It's fantastic. And like I said, I've read 5.5 chapters so far, and every single one of them has been great.
Good. I'm glad you
And
like
you don't
it.
have to read it in order. You can pick it up, put it down.
So you should write a review on Amazon.
Yeah, I should.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Cheryl Bruno, editor of Secret Covenants and author of Come Hither to Zion. Thank you so much. And Method Infinite. Thank you so much for being here on Gospel Tangents.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Cheryl Bruno. She's the author of 3 amazing books, Secret Covenants, Come Up Hither to Zion, and Method Infinite. So, Cheryl, it was great sitting down with you. I'm glad we got to sit down and talk. It was a lot of fun. In our next conversation, I'm excited to introduce a member of Reformed Mormonism, Rob Lauer.
Anyway, I'm Rob Lauer, and I have been a Reformed Mormon for 22 years. I'm part of Reformed Mormonism.
Okay.
And I guess you would sort of think of that if you were to think of like the LDS Church as being Orthodox Judaism, and maybe fundamentalists as being sort of like Hasidic Judaism, and then Community of Christ being like conservative Judaism. We would be like...
No, they would be liberal Judaism.
Yeah, we're even more liberal than we're very liberal.
Well, you're the liberal ones, huh?
Yeah, we're the liberal ones. Yeah.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.